Welcome. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody feeling after karaoke night? Shall we all sing a song? Patrick actually has a podcast on Broadway shows, so we could all sing a Broadway song to welcome him. Just kidding. Oh yeah, didn't book that. Well, Patrick is a very good friend of mine. I met him through the 48. He has competed in the Washington, D.C. 48-hour film project 16 times. He has won twice. He's won a special genre competition years ago when we did the politics or comedy genres. And then this year, he has won D.C. in the regular 48 with The Crown Must Go On. He is a professor teaching screenwriting at Catholic University. He's also taught at American University. And he is going to be sharing with you his tips and information about how characters inform your plot. Patrick.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, and thank you guys all for coming. This is great. I had no idea who was going to show up. This is fantastic. As Mark said, yes, I'm a professor, writing professor, visual literacy professor. I'm also a playwright and screenwriter in DC, and through a combination of education and practical experience, I sort of have become disillusioned with the screenwriting books that we all read and that we all buy. And so when Mark asked me to talk about something getting from 48 into something with a little bit more time on your hands and how to develop story, I wanted to talk about this basic idea that I've had for a very long time, which is that characters essentially are plot. Because if you look for advice on, there will be, by the way, no Scrooge McDuck slides. I wonder if you're waiting for that. And no shots of people staring at water. If you look for advice on screenwriting, you'll hear about story. Everything's about story. Story. The big book's called Story, the Robert McKee book. And everybody always talks about story as being the thing you have to get. You have to have your story. You have to know your story. You have to be able to pitch your story. The problem is that really there are only 36 stories. I don't know if this is something you guys have heard, but this is true. It was discovered in the 18th century by this guy. His name is Carlo Gozzi, and he wrote down 36 different dramatic situations, and that was it. And it was such a well-known thing that he did that Sturm und Drang writers like Schiller and Goethe tried to find more stories, and they searched for the mythical 37th story, and they could never find it. And eventually it was put into a book in 1895 by Georges Polti called The 36 Dramatic Situations. You can find this as a PDF on YouTube for free, or on Google for free. It's a very, very handy thing. So there's only 36 stories, and here they are. These are the only kind of stories you can write. Obviously, some of the more modern examples weren't in the 19th century text, like Star Trek II. But this is basically, if you take any kind of story, you can break it down to this level, that there are only 36 stories. But if there are only 36 stories and 175 movies get released in America every day or something like that, how are they doing it? How are they staying memorable? What are the movies that we love? And I think, to me, the big thing to remember is that we don't remember stories very much. You know, stories are fine, but what we actually remember are great lines of dialogue, great scenes, and characters. Characters are the things we cling on to. Characters are the things that we love. Characters are the things we remember and we, try to emulate or try not to emulate, as the case may be. And I think that if you focus when you're writing on creating memorable and interesting characters and putting them together, your story will simply develop itself. There will simply be no other thing that can happen because, title of the lecture. So, I am going to be using a few of the screenwriting texts sort of as baseline to sort of use their own information against them almost, to show that this is going. So we're going to use this chart, which I do actually love. If you guys have never read Save the Cat, you can Google this chart. This is free online also, which basically outlines, Blake Snyder's idea of how a movie is structured. And my argument is basically we can take the same exact chart and replace these story beats with character beats. And to talk about that for my text today, we're going to be using 4 movies, 2 classics and 2 that came out last year. And so we have Casablanca, The Apartment, Barbie, and The Holdovers. Just a quick show of hands, who has seen Casablanca? Great. The Apartment? Fewer. Barbie? Great. And the holdovers? Fewer again. Okay, good. So I'm going to go kind of a quick overview for them to let you know what they're about, just in case you haven't actually seen them. Because to me, it is really the characters of these movies, not the plots, that have made them. I mean, the top two are classics of American cinema, and I think these two, obviously both nominated for Best Picture this year, are going to be movies that people revisit over and over and over again. They're going to survive the test of time because the way the characters are created, designed, and then most importantly, pitted against each other is what actually propels the movie forward. So if you don't know, a real quick rundown of each movie. The Holdovers down here in the corner, directed by Alexander Payne, written by David Hemmingson, although that is currently under litigation by the WGA. Yeah, this was written before that happened. Came out last year. It takes place in the Boston area of the United States and is about a group of boys at a school who have to stay at their boarding school over the Christmas holiday, and the teacher who has to mind them, and the head chef who serves them food. Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, screenplay by Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, based on the toy line by Mattel, as the WGA made them say. Also came out last year and is about one Barbie doll's journey from Barbie Land to the real world, along with Ken, to find out why she's having thoughts about death. The Apartment, directed by Billy Wilder and written by Wilder and his partner I.A.L. Diamond, came out in 1960 and is about an accounting man played by Jack Lemmon named Baxter, had a huge insurance firm in New York, who lets senior executives use his apartment for their extramarital affairs so he can get ahead at work. And Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtiz, screenplay by Julius Epstein, Philip Epstein, and Howard Koch, based on the play Everybody Comes to Rick's. Came out in 1942 and is about Richard Blaine, who runs a cafe in Morocco, which has become a way station for refugees trying to flee the Nazis and make it to Lisbon. Exactly. So that's the basic idea. And to start with, you know, the basic idea of putting these things together is, first I want to start with the biggest mistake I think that everybody makes, which is very well outlined here by Truby in his book, Anatomy of a Story, that the single biggest mistake writers make when creating characters is that they think of the hero and their characters as individuals. You really want to be creating these characters as a group. Characters are not, you don't start with, because what we all know, what's the first thing you're supposed to start with when you write a screenplay? What do they tell you in the books? You start with the hero, right? That's where you're supposed to begin. You're supposed to start with the hero. Ever since somebody figured out that George Lucas read this book before he wrote Star Wars, we've been talking about the hero's journey. Have you guys been talking about the hero's journey? Have you seen this diagram a couple times? Sometimes they put neat graphics with it. That one has a lot of words, right? We hear about the hero's journey all the time. So I'll meet them where they stand, and we'll start with the hero. How do you create your hero? And the first question you have to ask is, who is your hero? And that's a really, really big question. Right now, I'm going to stop using the word hero. We're going to eliminate the word hero. I don't like the word hero because the hero implies good guy. First of all, it implies guy, and second of all, it implies good guy. And not all of your heroes need to be good guys. In fact, I think it might be more interesting if they're not. So we're going to start using the word protagonist. So who is your protagonist? Well, the first questions I like to ask when creating a protagonist are these two, is what does your protagonist want and what does your protagonist need? This is the most basic way to design a character to me, is what do they want and what do they need? And if you watch most of these films, you will see that there is a scene that comes up very early in the movie where the protagonist states what they want or states what they need. So very basically, we have characters introducing who they are. That is what they want. They have a very, very clear want. We have Rick, who just sticks his neck out for nobody, wants to be left alone. We have Baxter, who doesn't really kind of know who he is. He's sort of like floating around a little bit. He's not quite sure. Barbie is just stereotypical Barbie and doesn't form causality thoughts. And Paul Hunnam views himself as a rigorous academic. That's who he is, and that's what he wants. He wants to be a rigorous academic. So that's what they want. And now you have to come up with what they need. And if you're doing this correctly, it's really, really important to have a need that is completely opposite to your character's want. Because then right away you have conflict. There's something that they actually need to develop. They need to have happen to them in order to be successful. So Rick needs to not be an isolationist and needs to get in the fight against the Nazis. Baxter, as the movie states in a certain scene, needs to be a mensch. He needs to learn to be a human being and stand up for himself a little bit. Barbie needs to learn that the world is more complicated and that she has a place in that more complicated world. And Paul Hunnam needs to stop viewing his students as antagonists and start viewing them as people. And that is these needs are pretty easy to see from the outset of the movie. We see these characters establishing very clearly what they want, and we can see that the need is something deep inside of them that needs to advance. And the best way to demonstrate your character's want and your character's need is through this role, which is the other important character you should be developing at the same time you're developing your protagonist, and that is the antagonist. You really want to create a protagonist equal to or above your protagonist, because as McKee writes, a protagonist in their story can only be as intellectually fascinating and emotionally compelling as the forces against them. And Truby kind of puts it even better to me. He says, the main opponent is the one person in the world best able to attack the great weakness of the hero, and they should attack it relentlessly. They should endlessly be there. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. When we think of an antagonist, who do you think? Who's the best antagonist in movies? Darth Vader's good. Not what I was thinking, though. That's a good. Who do you? Lex Luthor? Hans. It's very good. I'm getting a lot of good guesses. See, I do this for film students. They don't have so many good answers. That's not who I was thinking of. I was thinking of a character who's appeared in, 6 movies in the last 15 years, probably. Got his own movie recently. Yeah. I think the Joker is the perfect example of this, especially in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight, because the Joker is the polar opposite of Batman. He's colorful, right? Batman wears black or blue and gray. He smiles. Batman never smiles, right? He talks a lot. Batman rarely speaks. His violence is, especially in the Nolan one, random and sort of untargeted. Batman is precise. And actually, in The Dark Knight, it gets even further, really impressively. Like, in The Dark Knight, he has exterior scars. Batman's are all interior. His backstory is amorphous. Everyone knows what happened to Bruce Wayne as a child. His clothes are thrown together and kind of random. Batman has a meticulously designed uniform. And he's really, really good at that one thing that Truby said, which is attacking Batman's weakness and doing it relentlessly. They are competing in The Dark Knight for the same thing. They are competing for, as the Joker says, the soul of Gotham. And that is what the whole situation hinges around. And in The Apartment, Billy Wilder creates a fantastic antagonist for Baxter. It's Mr. Sheldrake, his boss, the guy you saw in the earlier scene. And Mr. Sheldrake is everything that Baxter says he wants to be. He's successful, he gets any woman he wants, whenever he wants to, he does whatever he wants, and he doesn't care about people, right? And therefore demonstrates to Baxter and to us the downside of what Baxter wants. And we really hope that Baxter doesn't end up like him, and that he can move quickly through the world. And also we have the added benefit in the movie of creating a love triangle between our characters, because our protagonist and antagonist are claiming to be in love with the same woman, though only one of them is really in love with her. I'll let you guess which one that is. In Barbie, anyone guess who the antagonist is in Barbie? Oh, it's hidden. The corporation, that's what you think, but the corporation actually, well, the corporation's not great, but they're kind of on her side. Yeah, the answer is Ken. Your antagonist can be your friend. It can be your boyfriend. It can be your best friend, right? Ken's journey in the movie is to be Barbie's friend, to try to help her, try to help her, try to help her. And then he's introduced to the patriarchy and he goes nuts. He brings the patriarchy back to Barbie land. He ruins everything. He ruins her want and her need. It's really, really nicely put together. And you also don't see him coming as the bad guy, right? You expect it to be the corporation or somebody in the real world or another Barbie, but no, it's the one closest to you. The call is coming from inside the house. In The Holdovers, the antagonist is this character. His name is Angus Tully. He's one of the kids. And this is why I stopped using the word hero earlier. Because in The Holdovers, one of the most interesting things about the movie to me is that our protagonist is a bad person. He's a teacher who beats up on students, not physically, but like emotionally. Like really abuses his power to get revenge on who he views as rich, entitled students. And some of them clearly are, but not all of them are. And Angus Tully is one of those. And Tully and Hunnam are thrust together very cleverly. First, they're like a group of 6 boys who have to stay for the holidays. And then at one point, they do a very clever thing, and they get rid of all the other boys. They go someplace else, and they're stuck one-on-one with each other. And that's ideal. If you can have your protagonist and your antagonist spend the whole movie with each other, you really, really have some interesting conflict, because they do not and should not get along. And it really is. So that's why, like I say, that's why I stopped using the word hero. Now, Casablanca takes antagonist to another level and uses something else that you may want to consider when you're designing characters. Because when you're designing characters, how many of you play tabletop role-playing games? Yeah. So you have the alignment chart, right, that you use to pick your characters. There's something very similar that you can use in screenwriting, which is called four-corner opposition. Four-corner opposition is, Truby defines it actually like this. Create great characters. Think of your characters as part of a web, with each helps to define the others. And to put it another way, a character is often defined by who they're not. So here we have Rick, Captain Renault, Victor Laszlo, and Major Strasser. Major Strasser is our big bad. He is our Nazi, and he is a true believer in the Axis cause. You have Victor Laszlo, who's in love with the same woman that Rick is in love with, who is a true believer for the Allies. And then you have up here Captain Renault, who, as he says, will take what comes. So he's on the side of the bad guys as long as that's convenient to him. He's an absolute nihilist, though, at heart. And that's what Rick wants to be. He wants to be a nihilist. He wants to not care. And as the movie goes on, these three other characters interact with him in various scenes and are kind of vying for his soul in a way. And what you can really do with four-corner opposition is at the end of the film, Rick doesn't become one of them. He kind of mixes the best of all of them and creates his own path. And that's really what four-corner opposition gives you. Another great movie that you can find a video about this online that does four-corner opposition is Batman Begins. But it's a common one. Once you know it exists and you try to pick out the antagonist of a movie, you can see it's a very, very clever thing to do. So we have our protagonists, we have our antagonists, and then we start to populate the film with colorful characters who sort of both reinforce and their allies, their enemies, their adversaries that come in from all different kinds of directions. And you really start to see what a colorful world you can populate. You know, you can have Alan if you want to. It's a really, just go nuts on it. And you really want to have, your lead character wants to have a friend that they can talk to. In The Holdovers, that's the role of Mary, the chef, who also provides a lot of other moral guidelines. Rick has a lot of friends who work at the cafe that come around. There's a lot of other Barbies, and America Ferrera and her daughter. And then there's the executives at the company, as well as Fran Kubelik, who he's in love with. All created together, none created in a vacuum, and all really interacting with each other and weaving each other together, which is what I'm going to talk about. Now, if we go back to our Save the Cat chart, we know we have to hit certain points on our journey. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to hit the highlights. And the big one I want to start with, because it's the most important one when you're designing a script, to me, is the concept of act breaks. Now, every screenwriting book defines an act break differently. Some people say there can only be 3 acts. Some people say, no, there can be 8 acts, which is wild if you want to go that way, I guess. But, basically, I adhere to 3-act structure. And I define for myself an act break as the moment your character makes an irrevocable decision directly connected to their want and need. It needs to be created. It needs to be going at both. We need to be heading towards both all the time, either stepping towards one or stepping away from the other. Stepping towards both can also be very possible. In Casablanca, Act 1 ends here. Rick is given the opportunity to help a friend, the friend who was mentioned earlier, and he makes a choice. Your stated want, right? I stick my neck out for nobody. And yeah, he probably had no chance to help his friend there, but he didn't. And then his friend gets killed, and that's an irrevocable decision if I ever heard one. Barbie's Act 1 has a much more clean ending. Act 1 ends when she decides to leave Barbie Land and head off into the great unknown of the real world. And The Holdovers Act 1 ends in a very interesting moment where 2 of the boys get in a fight, and Hunnam wants to know who started it, and in order to find out who started it, he sort of psychologically tortures that very scared-looking boy there in the middle into admitting who started the fight, and then bullies that kid into confessing. That kid confesses, and that kid gets bullied later for having ratted the other kids out. So again, your protagonist doesn't need to be a good person. And actually, in an interesting way, just like Rick not being a good person can lead to a much more satisfying result at the end. But act breaks don't need to come with big pink banners or gunfights. They can come with a very, very, very subtle decision, and one that actually may not become, the true ramifications of which may not become clear until later in the film. So this is the end of Act 1 in the apartment. Yeah, so Baxter has decided to cut out all his other friends and align himself fully with Mr. Sheldrake, who he does not yet realize is his antagonist, and this decision will have terrible repercussions on him later. Excuse me. So, like I say, they don't have to be huge moments. They can be kind of invisible. They can be kind of woven in. Again, you can add a fade if you want to. Let the audience know where you're at. The next major moment for character development I want to talk about is the midpoint of the film, which really should be called this, the midpoint collision. I really, really think the midpoint is an underrated part of movies. Midpoints can be incredibly effective. About halfway through, your character should really, Snyder talks about setting the clock, people talk about all kinds of little plot devices you should do. But in the midpoint of the movie, to me, to be really, really interesting, you can have your character absolutely faced with a very, very tough decision and then have to make a choice, a very clear choice. And when that happens, we really get, in the best case scenario, we get an excellent view of how the character is. As McKee writes, true character can only be expressed through choice in a dilemma. How a person chooses to act under pressure is who they are, and the greater the pressure, the truer and deeper the choice to the character. These moments can also be incredibly subtle. In Barbie, there's a great moment right at the middle of the film where she gets to Mattel and she's offered the opportunity to get back in the box and go back to Barbie land, and she told everything will be fine. And this is exactly what she wants. She wants everything to be fine again. But something in her tells her this is a bad decision, and she won't do it. She wants to do it. You can see her want to do it in the scene. It's really, really well acted. But she just is like, no, I'm not gonna do it, and she runs away. And then we have the great chase through Mattel in the middle of the movie, which is excellent. In the midpoint of the apartment, it's a little steeper. Baxter comes back to his apartment after Mr. Sheldrake has mistreated Miss Kubelik yet again, and she has attempted to kill herself in his apartment. And he now suddenly is faced with the real-life repercussions of the thing that he's been trying to keep at arm's length, which is that these people are people, and people's lives are getting kind of abused in his apartment. In The Holdovers, we have a very similar moment of failure. I think failure is really good at the midpoint for the protagonist. Hunnam takes everybody to a holiday party near the school against kind of his better judgment. Things go kind of badly. Mary, our chef character, her son was killed in Vietnam recently, and she has kind of a very sad breakdown quietly at the party, so they decide to leave, and this is what happens. So in a moment of true shame, we have at this point in the midpoint of the film, from this moment on out, Hunnam decides that he's going to try to actually create a Christmas for everybody and be a good person, to varying levels of success. It is a comedy. Casablanca also goes, so these are three examples, sort of two examples in a row of characters sort of failing at the midpoint. Casablanca goes kind of the other way. Casablanca, Rick has been doing a really good job at drinking and being a charming nihilist, and it's all been going very well for him. But at the midpoint of the film, he's confronted with this young lady here. It's been made clear in the movie that Captain Renault, our charming Axis nihilist, sleeps with young ladies to get them exit visas, to get them out of Casablanca. And he has been, probably not for the first time, Rick has been asked to vouch for Captain Renault's goodwill, that if this young lady sleeps with him, she will indeed get an exit visa. And she tells him her sad story, that her husband is there and gambling, trying to win money, and he's losing, and it's not going very well. And something inside of Rick snaps. In a very sort of drunken, not drunken, but sort of tipsy moment, he just sort of seems like he's had enough with the way things are going. And so what he does is go into the roulette room and arrange for her husband to win money so that they can pay for the exit visa so that she doesn't have to sleep with Captain Renault. It's a small decision of humanity, I think on a sliding scale, we can all agree. But for Rick, it's a big jump. He's gotten himself involved. And from this moment on out, he kind of won't be able to stop. He really has discovered how good it feels to do the right thing. And he's not going to be able to quit it. He's going to have to keep moving forward. The next moment I want to talk about is the end of Act 2, my favorite moment when writing, which is the all is lost moment. You guys heard about the all is lost moment? This comes up a lot. All is lost is just absolutely the best. It's the moment you have to develop in your screenplay where there is absolutely no way for the character to get what they need. There's absolutely no way. Just never, ever, ever going to happen. And then we spend the last third of the movie getting that and seeing how they do it. And the more insurmountable you can make the all is lost moment, the better the triumph comes when it turns it all the way around. Barbie's all is lost moment comes in an excellent moment of Ken's full emergence with the patriarchy, where they come back to discover that he has turned Barbie Land into Kendom, and it's all horses and patriarchy, and horses and brewski beers. That's what he says, and so Barbie has a moment where she completely just loses it. All is lost in that. Barbie chooses her want over her need. She needs to stand up and fight back, and she decides not to. She decides to lie down, and there's absolutely no way she's ever going to get up. It's never going to happen. In Casablanca, the all is lost moment comes when we're supposed to think as an audience that Rick has sold out Victor Laszlo to the Nazis and arranged for him to be arrested. Spoiler alert, he hasn't. In The Holdovers, the all is lost moment is actually a really, really kind of interesting moment where Hunnam is confronted he takes Tully to Boston, and they're finally getting along and everything's going really well, and then Tully runs away from him. And Hunnam is given the opportunity to kind of bust him, to really like expel him from school and do some terrible things to him, and he's totally justified in doing it. And instead, he takes him to see his father. His father isn't dead, he's been institutionalized. And we now encounter the real benefit of having your protagonist be actually a bad guy, because he gets to have a moment of redemption. And they go see his father, Tully's father. It ends with him looking like this, so it doesn't go great. But it draws the characters closer together, and they all suddenly are on the same page. They're having a really good time. Because Hunnam is the bad guy, quote unquote, of the movie, his all is lost moment can be a victory for the rest of the movie. It's a really, really interesting choice. However, there's still one aspect of his character, so now he views his students as humans. He's grown as a person, but there's still one little moment of his character intact, and that is his desire to be seen as an academic, which will have to be tested later in the movie. In The Apartment, we have my favorite kind of all is lost moment that if you can write an all is lost moment like this, you've really crafted something special. He gets everything he wants. But it's not what he needs, not even close to what he needs. And it's actually not what he wants anymore. This is an amazing thing to do to a character at the end of Act 2. It's absolutely incredible. Pixar loves to do this. Inside Out does it, Soul does it, Toy Story 3 does it, I think Toy Story 2 does it. It's a really, really good... I don't think Toy Story does it, but a lot of them... Toy Story 4 might do it, I haven't seen it. But it's a really, really interesting thing to do, to give your character everything that they've asked for from the beginning. And for them to discover, I don't want it anymore. It's a really, really kind of dark and fun moment to put your character in so that they can dig their way out into the finale. The finale is a really, really basic position. Need supplants want. The characters are revealed for who they truly are in this circumstance. Rick double-crosses Renault, kills Major Strasser, tells Ilsa to go with her husband, and gives everything up that he wants. He gives everything up that he wants to have what he needs, which is the courage of his convictions and to fight the Nazis. And he's rewarded, because then Captain Renault backs him up. The two of them go off, and everybody's having a good time. Baxter quits his job. He's finally pushed to the edge, and when he doesn't go get Miss Kubelik. It's a very, very clever thing. He quits his job, and then she finds out he quits his job, and she goes to get him. It's a really, really nice, satisfying conclusion that we have there. Barbie saves Barbie Land from the Kens, and reunites everything the way it's to be. She reconciles with the emotionally damaged Ken, I guess we would call him, and he discovers he's Knuff, and that's good. But then she leaves Barbie Land, a very important moment. The thing she wants is for everything to go back to normal. Everything goes back to normal, but she leaves. She goes out to the real world and decides she's going to be a real person. Now, Hunnam, they really put through the ringer at the end of the movie. He's pretty much okay right up to the end. He's good, he likes his students, everybody's fine. And then he gets called into this meeting with his boss and Tully's mother and stepfather, who have discovered that he went to see his father at this institution in Boston, and they're incredibly upset. And he's faced with a choice. If he tells them the truth, they're going to pull Tully out of school. He's going to go to military academy. This is 1971. That means he's going to go to Vietnam when he graduates from military academy. Or he can do what he does, which is he covers for him and gets fired. And it's a really beautiful moment at the end of this movie where he gives everything up that he ever wanted to do the right thing and faced with an impossible situation. And it's really, really great. It tears the character down to their studs, and we like him so much more at the end of this movie than we do at the beginning. And so, as I hope I've demonstrated, by creating strong protagonists with clear wants and needs, giving them antagonists who are custom built to attack those needs, and creating secondary and tertiary characters who are various reflections of those wants and needs. And Alan. Screenwriters have crafted great films. They're solid, the stories are solid, but they're solid because they're built on this foundation of tremendously diverse, interesting characters. And they actually have one other thing I mentioned right at the beginning that makes them absolute classics, and that is these movies have some great lines. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or anything? I think we have some time. We have time? We have a few, yeah, does anybody have any questions? We have a mic. Oh, Mike's coming. Hold on, Mike's coming. We'll start right down here. Oh, there we go. Yep, and then you.
Hi.
Hello.
When it comes to A story and B story, would you say your A story, the want is mostly embedded in the A story? And your B
Yeah,
story is the need?
you want. I think you want it.